Hey friends, it's Valloween season, the perfect mashup of both Halloween and Valentine's. Romance is a genre that can be so hit or miss for me, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to figure out what makes a romance novel work or not work for me. I know that if I try to read just like a general romance novel, it won't work for me. This is not the first time I've ever tried to read romance, not my first rodeo in the slightest. So at this point, I do know that it does need to have some supernatural or paranormal elements to the story. And it's even more effective for me if there is like legit horror elements that are at the core of the story. Just thinking about some books that are predominantly horror that worked for me, and they did have romantic subplots. The first ones that come to mind is the very popular Dead Romantics, which many horror lovers really love this one. And I love it for its references to Wednesday Addams. You have a family of people who work at like a mortuary or a funeral home. Like, what a cool setting. You have me. And then also to top it all off, there's this ghost human love story too that's a part of this as well. I've also been really getting into Gothic literature as well, which typically does have romance as a part of the story, but also other things like hauntings, paranormal aspects that I really love and I really vibe well with. Recently, I read Vampires of El Norte, which I really enjoyed, but I'm definitely in the same group of people who critique it for not having enough vampires. It would for sure have been a 5-star book for me if the vampires were not so much like on the periphery of the story, if they were like the central part. Because like many people have said, it is very much a romance first and then a horror novel second. But I love the historical aspects of this story. So I'm thinking about maybe if there's like historical elements that are part of romance novels that I read, and then maybe like a little dash of horror, that'll leave me feeling like that book was enjoyable. And then also there's this like subset of books that is kind of like the opposite of a romance novel, but it includes just kind of any emphasis on relationships, mostly those of like the toxic variety. Maybe it even factors in a devolution of a relationship, like it's unraveling. Those stories are really interesting to me. And one that was a 5-star for me that I don't think gets enough love is The Chrysalis by Brendan Deneen. This creature feature focuses on the devolution of a marriage at a very critical point in their relationship. Awesome subtext about growing older and growing apart that I found very captivating. So those horror books with romantic subplots are kind of guiding my selection of books that I'm gonna try for this vlog. The first book I'm getting to in this vlog is gonna be A Long Time Dead by Samara Breger. This book has the historical aspects that I know I love in horror books. It's set like in the 1830s, it's in London. There's vampires. I have a really good history with loving vampire books and movies, so hopefully this is a winner. There's a romantic subplot here that I think is happening with the main character who becomes overnight basically a vampire without much consent in the matter. And then there's somebody who's like kind of walking her through this transition, ingratiating her into this new life, new lifestyle completely. And I think there's some like romantic attachments that evolve from that initial dynamic of just kind of helping them through becoming a vampire. So I'll check in with you once I get into the 20% mark of this book, which is going to be, I tabbed that for page 83, because at that point, if this is something that's not, really fun for me to read, I think I'm just going to put it down because it's, it's a chunker. It's like 400 pages, and I don't want to, waste my February when I have so many other books I'm super excited for. Okay, so I got to 20% in A Long Time Dead, and on this beautiful Saturday afternoon, I'm DNFing it, which I am really sad about, but I'm confident in my decision to do this. I'm honestly very bored, and it's feeling very predictable, very familiar. For the entirety of the 83 pages that I read that brought me up to the 20% mark, we have our main character, Poppy, who is basically just learning the ropes about what it means to be a vampire, and she's staying in one place. She's like in this one decrepit old building, this estate, and she's, getting a little bit more attached to the person who's like kind of taking care of her. And, there's this like big bad character that is not even, entering this scene at that point. It just feels like what they're doing has like already been done before a million times. It really brings to mind another book I really enjoyed, a YA vampire story called The Lost Girls by Sonia Hartle. I really liked that one. I thought that one was really fun and quite the adventure, and I love the sapphic nature of that. And this one also has a lot of those elements, but boring, just really boring, like just boring basically. And it's reading just a little too much on the romance side, not enough of the historical stuff that I love, and we don't really have too much conflict here. I think it really just does come down to the pacing being a little bit too slow for my liking. So although I'm putting down this one, I'm going to start up Reluctant Immortals later on today. My partner and I are heading out to San Francisco for a little, day date adventure into the evening. And we're gonna be doing a lot of public transportation stuff there. So I'll have an opportunity to make a lot of headway in the audiobook for Reluctant Mortals. So fingers crossed, this is a vampire story that I eat up and that I'm, really feeling that connection to the characters and interested in the story. And hopefully there's something unique with the way that the vampires are used. Today is Sunday, and I've just been bumming it, listening to Reluctant Immortals on audiobook. My partner and I had a whole lot of fun yesterday going to San Francisco. We tried to go at least one time every month because it is relatively close to us, but it's not so close where it's like really logistically easy to get there in terms of like transportation. But we went to Buena Vista Cafe, which is known for its Irish coffees. They were delicious, so fantastic. Just such a cool mix between urban and marine and like sea vibes. I don't know, I just love San Francisco so much. But because of all the public transportation that we took, I was able to get like so much done for Reluctant Immortals. That audiobook is really short and it's just so addictive, so easy to get through. In my TBR video where I talked about how I'm gonna be reading this book this month, I had a lot of people who shared their disappointment with this book, but there were a few people who were like, this is my favorite, I loved it for its character study, and I'm thinking specifically of Sarah from Wicked Reading and also Mary from Books with Tofukado. They really love this one and I'm with them. I know my way around Outlier Island pretty well at this point. It gave me everything I wanted from the setting, like Hollywood. I love Hollywood as a setting, and also like the 1960s time period. I know the era well, I teach it. I know the story was simple. I know that, not a lot happened in terms of like the external plot, but I really, really loved it. I think Gwendolyn Kiste delivered on her whole goal of basically trying to rewrite or just consider what happens after the stories of Jane Eyre and Dracula end. What would it look like for a more modern take through their perspectives, like really centering them as women? Because although Jane Eyre was written by a woman, unlike Dracula, there were still, like cultural and societal confines upon which the author was able to write her story and write her female characters. A lot of like slice of life moments and a bit of kookiness as well. Reluctant Immortals was just very meditative. Like it had me thinking about the importance of like loyalty in female friendships and how, crucial they are in our lives. And it just makes me think about how society really de-emphasizes friendships the older that we get. And I feel like that's even more challenging for men, where intimacy between men is, stigmatized quite a bit. And then when you think about women, there's just so much emphasis, so much energy given to being mothers, typically on that traditional timeline, or being, wives, and just always also having to like balance career as well. Like there really isn't that much energy left for you or time given to, foster your female friendships that you really need. And that's the bummer. Like you really need them. And you just don't have the opportunity to really cultivate them because you're pulled in like 80,000 different ways. So then reading Reluctant Immortals and seeing such like fierce female friendships on display and prioritizing of women and thinking about this idea of power and control, it was very refreshing to me, and I think really important as just a reminder of what it means to have healthy, life-giving relationships that are both platonic and also romantic. So it also like hits both like Valloween Valentines, but also like Galentines as well, like total pink core right here. So moving forward with my reading journey here, I thought it'd be a really great idea to read two books simultaneously that are in conversation with the other. I'm gonna be reading Phantom Manor on audiobook, and this one is gonna be a vintage 1960s Gothic romance. At the same time, I'm going to be reading physically Bluebeard's Castle by Anna Biller. And this one is very similar, like it's, Gothic romance, but also it has like the erotica, so I think it's gonna be a little bit more spicy. And why I think these books be such a great pairing together is that I have a feeling that the book Phantom Manor is going to have tons of cliches, tons of tropes that are part of the Gothic romance novel, like, worlds that are going to be commented on or challenged, critiqued in Bluebeard's castle, because the flap of Bluebeard's castle really talks about how it's like going to be this feminist take on Gothic tropes or plot devices, all these things. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of commentary in Bluebeard's castle that if I don't have the background for just general genre tropes, cliches, plot devices, that just they're going to go way over my head. I had such a great mail day yesterday. It made me crack up when I opened up my box from Five Below to see Chucky's little eyeballs staring up at me. I feel like somebody in their distribution center really has a great sense of humor. I loved it. I really needed some Chucky swag because this is my year of Chucky. If you saw my reset video for the new year, I am watching all the movies all the way through that entire franchise for the very first time. And I always like to be the best fan I can for any franchise, so I needed a t-shirt, and I also really needed, not a want, but definitely a need here for these little Funkos of Chucky and his bride, Tiffany. I can't wait to get to Bride of Chucky. That's gonna be a February watch for sure. And then I also had some Candyland Funko Pops as well. This has nothing to do with Halloween or horror, but it's just so reminiscent of my childhood. Candyland has to be one of my favorite games that I wish still had some playability as an adult. Unfortunately, it doesn't. But I did get a chocolate version of it where some of the game pieces on the board are edible. I also had my January subscription box for Twisted Allure come on in. If you aren't familiar, Twisted Allure is a really cool small business that feels very efficient. I guess I would describe them more as a medium-sized business because they do have quite a bit of stuff in stock and there's a huge demand. They have the cutest packaging. It's basically any horror fan's Bath and Body Care dream. At the end of 2023, I subscribed to their subscription box, so I'm giving it a shot and I'll see how long it takes for me to just be swimming and drowning in all of these body care items. Once I had that Five Below package come in the mail, I was finally able to decorate for Valentine's, which I don't go all out for like I do for Halloween or even Christmas, but I think it's just a really fun opportunity to just be creative. I have a few mugs that I've been collecting over the years. I love the motif of a conversation heart, so I have a few mugs that have that. I also have a mug set that's both the Bride of Frankenstein and then Frankenstein himself, so one's black and one is green. I also have a whole bar cart area and a tea shelf above my recycling bins that I think is fun to have one concentrated area for all of my decor. And so you see a lot of food items and treats and stuff to kind of accessorize my coffees or my teas or hot chocolates. A lot of those things are from Target. And I really just like to keep stuff out and visible that I plan on using or baking with, cooking with, whatever for that month. Because for me and my brain, if something is out of sight, it's truly out of mind. So I just would hate for things to just get to the back of the pantry and me totally miss an opportunity to use them. And I'm absolutely obsessed with what I ended up doing for my kitchen table centerpiece. I used my two little Candyland Funko Pops, added some actual real candy around it, and then I had this Goose Creek candle that I got many months ago with their Candyland line that they may still have out at the moment, but I just kind of put it together and it just came out so cute. I'll just be looking at it as I'm walking around my apartment because I love it so much. I did finish Phantom Manor on audiobook. It was such a breeze to read, just the way that it was written. And then so far, I am 50% of the way through Bluebeard's Castle by Anna Biller. I am so happy that I decided to read these books at the same time. I don't think I have enough Gothic fiction under my belt, especially classics at this point, and I'm working on that. Because I think with this book, it's very odd the way it's written. At the 20% mark, I was actually questioning. I was like, is this something I'm gonna DNF? Am I liking this? This felt like so much of a first novel. The writing felt a little clunky. It kind of felt a little bit more like this was a script first for a movie, and then she just kind of added in more details to make it a book and add more like exposition. So the 20% mark, I was like, wait, am I not enjoying this? Like, should I DNF this? And then the other part of me was like, no, girl, you paid money for this one. This is like the one book in like months I've actually paid for that I didn't get from the library. So I'm like, okay, you know what? You got to stick through. You got to keep going because, you know, you paid for this. And so I'm really happy I kept going because by the 40% mark, I was in my groove. Like I kind of felt like the flow of the writing was working a little bit more for me. And I understood the assignment here. It's not like, this book needs to be read in context. It needs to be seen as like, kind of like, almost like satire of Gothic fiction, I want to say. Like something that is not its own novel. Like it clearly needs this understanding of Gothic fiction as a whole, or else you're going to be like, hey, wow, this is like the weirdest, funkiest book ever, but actually in reality, it is doing something. And I find it to be very sophisticated what it's doing if you could look kind of beyond the writing style. The writing style is very much like telling and not a lot of like showing, which kind of reminds me of V. Castro's a little bit, where she has a very distinctive way of writing that is very much like brash and it's direct, it's very blunt. But it's like, that's so her, that's like very unique. And there's a message there and there's something that she's doing. And I feel like Anna Biller might be, you know, still honing their craft, but also I think there is something super unique here. And that's what I wanted. And that's kind of what I expected from this kind of director that has a really clear sense of self when it comes like their artistic vision and creative projects. I'm really enjoying this one. Phantom Manor, on the other hand, that one was interesting. I read this one because I was really curious about what these like vintage Gothic novels looked like. You know, I heard so much about them being hyped up by people like Grady Hendrix, for example, who find them to be like super influential pieces of literature. So I'm glad I was able to read at least one. I'll definitely go back and read more. It had horrible disability representation. It said the R word multiple times. And I know it was published in the 60s, but still like reading that in 2024 multiple times in one very brief novel was jarring. Strange, odd, but great context for what I'm reading right now that I'm actually very much enjoying. So I'll check back in when I finish this one. I finished 2 books since I last checked in with you. The first one is Bluebeard's Castle by Anna Biller, and then the second is My Zombie Sweetheart by Christopher Robertson. I can't remember the last time that I struggled so hard to rate a book like I am right now with Bluebeard's Castle. And honestly, I think I'm still processing how I feel about this book. And what makes it super challenging for me to actually like put a final number to is that I had so much excitement for this book and what I really wanted it to be. It just ultimately did not end up being that. And then when I heard it was actually supposed to be a movie initially, and then she scrapped it because she really wanted to do a lot of like internal monologue stuff to be included, I was really bummed because I do really feel like this would have been an awesome movie, because the parts I loved about this book so much were definitely the setting, the atmosphere, you know, like what would be a set design or like costume design in a movie. I could really see how this did start off as a script for a movie. And another thing that makes this really challenging for me to rate is that the message is really important. It's critical, it's timely, it's sadly universal and timeless. The message she's trying to get across here. I did go on Goodreads and find a 5-star and 1-star review that I think hits on the complexity of my emotions. I found this 5-star review written by BJ, where they also admit that despite giving this book 5 stars, they really felt that Anna Biller is best suited with her skills with film rather than writing novels. And I definitely agree with that. And I love being able to see what people are eating and what they're doing. And I just feel like what they're wearing is also a big part of what draws me to the Gothic genre in general, is the visual eye candy. And she definitely gave that. But again, that's a big reason why I feel like that would have translated far more effectively with being something that was filmed rather than told to us in text. The review goes on to say that the symbolism here is not subtle, it is super direct and obvious, and I wholeheartedly agree about that. I think that's something that makes me not enjoy this book as much. I do enjoy looking and analyzing closely subtext in novels. And I think the ones that I look back on that I've enjoyed the most are the ones that aren't as overt and obvious, and that they give my brain something to do. And I understand that Anna Biller would want to create something that's like authentic to the topics and issues that she's trying to, get across in her story. But the pacing, again, like I remember really enjoying this, I think in the first quarter, but then I started to get a little tired and fatigued of like the runaround basically. And so the pacing, although I think is intentionally done in a way to be super slow and cyclical, I just found myself to be really exhausted. And then moving on to the 1-star review I saw on Goodreads here, Rosie mentions that she's not too sure who the audience of this book is supposed to be. The reviewer mentions not having a lot of sympathy for the main character. I did have a lot of sympathy for them. I also found myself to be a little frustrated by their decisions, especially towards the second half of the book. It doesn't seem like this reviewer is understanding or aware of like the Gothic genre. So I think, again, like I've mentioned previously in this vlog, you really do have to have a pretty good understanding of the Gothic genre to appreciate what Anna Biller is doing here, because she is talking back to these tropes, to these like plot devices and a lot of like the toxicity amongst like romantic characters in these stories. Imagine like you are in the middle of somebody's thought process as they're understanding that they're having a really unhealthy relationship unfold in their lives. And that despite the fact that intellectually the main character knows what's going on is wrong and unhealthy for them, emotionally, they still feel very much invested in that story. And sadly, that's just the reality of people in these situations. So although it's very, very uncomfortable to have to watch and, read as an audience member, as a reader, it's still very much accurate to the experience. And I think Anna Biller treated it seriously. I don't want to spoil anything, but I just feel like this is like a feminist novel. I want to be like inclusive of all different definitions of femininity, but there was like a message from the author at the end that I just did not agree with in terms of how you get yourself out of these toxic relationships and like what it means to do so in a healthy way for women. So as much as I want to rate this like a 3, I feel like ultimately it is a 2-star because there's just so much disappointment with my excitement not really matching the reality of my reading experience, but still an important book nonetheless, if read through the lens of just the general Gothic romance, Gothic genre. Early this morning, I did finish My Zombie Sweetheart by Christopher Robinson, and boy, is this one like a raving, amazing, in big bold lights, a 5-star for me. I am really happy that I gave this book a shot. It was kind of on a whim. I'm not a big mood reader. I plan things out quite a bit, mostly because I rely on the library for a lot of my reading, actually probably like 95% of it. I picked up this book because I knew Bluebeard's Castle was not how I wanted to end this project. What are some things I've liked in the past? And one big thing that comes to mind is the Warm Bodies series, which is more than just the movie. It encompasses so much. There's like a sequel, multiple prequels, and there's like a novella that's a part of it. So if you even like the movie remotely, you should get into the series that it's based on. It's amazing. It includes a zombie love interest, and you have the zombie that's kind of becoming more human over time. It's very existential, very philosophical, possibly cosmic in a way, and there is a romance in there that I enjoyed seeing from like the different angles. So I picked up My Zombie Sweetheart because I already know I love Christopher Robinson stuff. I've been meaning to get to a lot of his backlist for a very long time after I first read Cotton Candy Massacre last year. I picked this one specifically because it did have that zombie element, and having a human and a zombie fall in love is a big part of the whole like Warm Bodies series. And also it's set in the 1950s, very much like diner, Grease, like that kind of vibe. It's written the same way that Cotton Candy Massacre is, which really worked well for me. I'm thoroughly obsessed with this story. I hope that there's a sequel either already out or one in the future, because it kind of ends on a very interesting note. I found it to be very compelling, the way that Christopher Robinson writes his characters. They're so textured. There's just so much I feel, and just the sentimentality. It's just really sweet the way that this plays out. It worked really well for me because you have a lot of gruesome moments with this zombie alien situation that's happening for this town. You had such great 1950s B-movie atmosphere, and you could just see how he was super inspired by The Blob, 1960s movie The Night of the Living Dead, and them. It gave me everything I wanted with the whole like historical stuff and actual like situations situations that would be going down between different people of different races. It was just a perfect balance of like the gore, horror, and the love that really made you root for these people. I read this book like in one day. I was so consumed by the characters and like what was gonna happen. I felt like literal visceral feelings of like suspense. I read it on my Kindle, so I was just like tapping away. It was so easy to read. I read it so quickly. I guess my only issue with this one, and it's like a minor one, is that something happens in the plot that's very similar to what goes down in Cotton Candy Massacre in terms of like the supernatural elements that come into play, but it's like done in a little different way. So I kind of like forgave that part, but definitely a standout read that I think has a lot of like universal interest for people. I really appreciate the diverse array of books I was able to, taste test in this video. I think in general, I'm not a big fan of smut or like spicy stuff. I think I'm more interested in like the sweet, sentimental sides of romantic relationships, and maybe even possibly on the way other side of things, like the deconstruction of romance and how they could be unhealthy, but mostly it's more like how you get yourself out of it. And I think that's why I loved Reluctant Immortals so much more than Bluebeard's Castle, because there's so much hope and power given to our female characters in Reluctant Immortals that, made Bluebeard's Castle very real, but also like such a downer. And that's part of the experience too, right? But I think when it comes to enjoying my reading experiences, I learn what works for me and what might not in the future. Knowing what I like when it comes to horror or horror adjacent books with romance subplots, let me know any recommendations for books or movies that you have that you think, oh, Lauren would probably really enjoy this one. And if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, please let me know what you thought about them. Even if they were like very different than mine, I'm still working and like kind of in progress about my thoughts on these books, especially Bluebeard's Castle. So definitely let me know down below in the comments what you thought. I'm wishing you all a love-filled February. I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.